Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Bridget Lepore, and today we're going to be talking about how to read a journal article. So for today's example, I picked an article that's available on a website online. The article is called Narcissus Exhausted, Self-Compassion Mediates the Relationship Between Narcissism and School Burnout. Now what you're going to find is journal articles have extraordinarily specific names. If you look at this one, it starts with Narcissus Exhausted. So sometimes you're going to find these articles start off with kind of like a catchy, let's get your interest title, but they quickly, after the colon, are going to move to the business part of this. In this case, it's telling us that we're talking about self-compassion, and we're talking about narcissism, and we're talking about school burnout. If you don't know these terms, it's probably a really good idea to stop right now and look them up in the dictionary, look them up in Google, just so that you're clear on what the author is writing about. Now, these articles came from a website called Selfcompassionorg, which is owned by Dr. Kristen Neff. So Dr. Kristen Neff works with the topic of self-compassion. So if you think about compassion, compassion is how we treat others. It's kind of an action. So if we go to self-compassion, we can actually read the definition right now. So we often have compassion for other people. When they are struggling or suffering, we reach out to them and we try to support them. We treat them with kindness. We don't always treat ourselves that way, though. And so that's really a big part of this article. Now, on this website here, if we go to research and then down to research publications, Dr. Neff has actually put together, notice it says here, for personal use only. So this is not something we can sell, right? But what she's actually put together is an entire bibliography of sources that are related to self-compassion. And she not only has the full bibliography, but she goes ahead and sorts them by area of study. So you can see all the different ways that self-compassion has been studied and documented. So this is a really interesting topic, and it's a really good one because most of us are not very good at being compassionate towards ourselves. We treat ourselves worse than others. So let's get back to the article. So when I first look at this journal article, of course, the first thing you want to check is, right, how many pages are this? Let's be honest. We all know that we look at these numbers and we go, oh no. Our journal articles can span anywhere from 5 to 7 pages up to 100 pages. The page count does not necessarily reflect how well written the article is. So there are extremely well written articles at 7 pages and extremely poorly or not useful articles that are 100 pages. But you do want to make sure that you're paying attention so you can gauge your time. Now, the first thing we do once we look at the journal article and decide we're going to read it is make sure we have the information we need for a citation entry. So we do have our title here, Narcissus Exhausted, Self-Compassion Mediates the Relationship Between Narcissism and School Burnout. We can see our authors here. Right? And just to know, in a scholarly journal article, the author's names are in order of importance or credit. So Barnett here is the one who is credited as the first author or most important author on the paper. Right? A lot of these you're going to see Dr. Neff's name all over them. Sometimes she's first author, sometimes she's in the middle, sometimes she's at the end. And that tells you her involvement with the project. Okay, so it's not alphabetical order, it is by order of importance, order of activity. Other things we need to know. Well, where was this published? This one happened to be published in the Personality and Individual Differences Journal. So a journal is a publication. It comes out on a schedule. It's a periodical, so it comes out on a schedule. Some of them are every month, some of them are every 2 months, every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, once a year. But the idea is there is a schedule for these journals. Sometimes it'll say Journal of Personality, but this one is just called Personality and Individual Differences. You're also going to need the edition and volumes and other information. Now, up at the top here, we can see that, right? That idea of which journal piece is it. We can see the year that it came out, and we can see the page numbers that it is spanning. You'll also notice that this information often shows up in journal articles in other places, like the top. Sometimes it'll be at the bottom. I can't really predict where you're going to find it, but you're always looking for things like the article name, the title, the authors, the year. You're looking for the journal name. You're looking for its edition and or volume and its page numbers. These are all really important things. Uh-oh, I clicked on something and it disappeared. So we'll give it a chance to come back. So let me go ahead and get this open again. So by the way, when you open a journal article, you're obviously going to see, you're often going to see this kind of a starting point, which we're going to have to click through to get to the actual article. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're back at the article. So taking a look at this article, and the same article can come up slightly different formatting each time. So taking a look at it, this might be slightly different than what I had opened before because just how the computer screen is going to lay it out. Now let's take a look at the parts of this article. So looking at it from top to bottom, we already discussed all the things about the article. Now we're going to talk about the layout. So a journal article is usually the summary or record of research that was done by the authors. This means that it's a primary source. The fact that it's in a journal usually means that we can trust it, that it's reliable and valid. Reliable means it does what it's supposed to, and valid means that it is something we can trust. So this is a valid and reliable source published in a reliable and valid journal by two academics out of University of North Texas. Now, the layout of these primary source documents that are summarizing real-world empirical research tends to follow a pretty predictable path. So for instance, right now, you're going to see the abstract. The abstract is usually about 150, 200 words. It can be a little bigger, but it's kind of the commercial before we get to the article, and it tells us what we're going to read. So when I look at this, it gives us kind of the entire story in about a paragraph. And it says previous research has linked narcissism with work-related burnout. So if I stop and process that, okay, there is research out there that connects narcissism, okay, which is a very extreme form of self-centeredness that can veer off into the realm of personality disorders. And it's associated, right, or linked to work-related burnout, meaning working to the point where you're no longer capable of doing your job. And then it says, however, no extant research has explored the relationship between narcissism and school-related burnout. All right, so now they're telling us, or putting their stake down, that people have not looked at how narcissism, or that self-centeredness, can affect burning out in school. And we all know that we feel burned out. But this is a psychology piece, so it could be, the definitions might be just a little bit different than what you and I are expecting. It goes on to say, from the standpoint of social mentality theory, okay, so we'd have to look that up. Narcissism may stem from an overactive threat system and maladaptive self-soothing system. Okay, so you can see that these are words we can look up and make sense of, but we're going to have to do some sense making to read this article. So your threat system is what your body and your brain views as a threat. And that self-soothing system is that internal, how you calm yourself down, how you make yourself feel better. So for instance, a cup of tea could be part of self-soothing. Well, lots of things could be self-soothing. The purpose of this cross-sectional study was to investigate the relationship between narcissism, self-compassion, and school burnout in a large sample of U.S. college students. So you notice how very, very to the point this is. This is what, we know. This is what we want to know, right? This is a theory we're using to understand this. And here is my purpose. Now it gives me my result. Narcissism was positively associated with school burnout. So it seems like, at least from here, people who were dealing with narcissism also were dealing with school burnout, but we're going to find out later. Narcissism had an indirect effect on school burnout through self-compassion, specifically through the over-identified and isolation components of self-compassion. All right, so there's actually a test on the website you might want to take, which tells you about these, can tell you about your own behavior in these components. And then overall, the results are consistent with the notion that narcissism is associated with maladaptive threat and self-soothing systems, and these are associated with school burnout. All right, So at this point, we might have to do a little context reading to make sure we know these topics before we dive in, at least so we know the language. Journal articles use a lot of language we don't know. So let's look at the rest of the article. So you're going to find that after the abstract, we're going to find this introduction section. The introduction section is what is going to tell us what's going on in the article. In this case, we can see they put their stake down right from the beginning. As many as 45% of college students fail to complete their degrees within 6 years. All right, you've probably heard that. Okay? It's extraordinarily disheartening for students to hear that and for their professors as well. But this is a national statistic. Okay? And then it goes on to say college dropout can be attributed to a wide array of factors. Okay? So they're telling us right from the beginning that a lot of students don't complete their degree. Okay? And if I read through this, the rest of the paragraph is going to be detail on this. Okay? Now, if I move towards the end, it says the purpose of this study was to investigate if narcissism has an indirect effect on school burnout. Okay? Then we move into what's often called a literature review, and this is kind of an expanded idea. Up here, we talked about the fact, right, they're introducing, this paragraph is introducing the idea that students don't all finish college, a lot of them burn out, and that we know narcissism is a problem. Now we're going to see in this second section, it's number 2 here, but it's literature review and other articles. Here's research talked about school burnout. And you'll notice how many citations are in there because the author is synthesizing or writing us a paragraph and just using these as their backups. Right? They're saying, this is where I learned this from. But they're writing in their own words what is useful to their paper here. So literature review covers 2, which is, right, this idea of school burnout. 3, there's research on narcissism. Right? And 4, there is information or research presented on self-compassion and the social mentality theory. So this is, we've got our intro, we've got our lit review. Right, or our background. Now, it does end with this idea of the current study. And the current study piece tells us what they're trying to do. In here it says the purpose of this study, but it could also say this study looks at. The results of this are, we are looking to question, our hypothesis is, and you'll see varieties of that language in here. Sometimes authors are nice and they give us a whole paragraph. Oftentimes they only give us 1 line or 2. So if you were reading this, your job is to really get and find the purpose of the study, read that as carefully as you can, and then go back and review the rest of this content to make sure you understand what your author is trying to do. Now there's other parts in here too that we're going to go through in more detail in another video. The next piece you'll see is the methods, okay? And it's not always numbered this way, this just happens to be what this journal does. Okay, so methods tell us what was done and who it was done with. We have the results, which is a technical section, which tells us, really what they found out. And then we have a discussion or conclusion, or both, that's going to explain to us what this means. This is usually followed, right? In this case, we have lots of diagrams in there. Not always the case, but it's always followed by the reference section, which is all of the sources that our authors used for their work. Okay? So just to review this journal article tells us where it was published, when it was published, who wrote it, gives us a abstract or very, very small pullout to tell us what it's about to see if we want to use it or look at it. We have an introduction followed by the literature or what the author knows that we need to know. Okay? Followed by the ending, which is often at the end of the introduction or at the end of the literature, which tells us about the study, the methods of how they did their work, right? The results of what they got, and the discussion of what it means. Okay? So this might remind you of a lab report, and that's kind of what it is. It's a permanent record of primary source of the work the researchers did and what they learned to add to the body of knowledge of the human race. All right, so in a further video, we're going to talk about these other sections in detail.